I'll call us back to order. Good afternoon now, which we're probably way behind. I apologize. Shifting from the military environment, our next panel will focus on undersea infrastructure and strategic resources. More specifically, we'll hear experts speak about China's approach to subsea cables and seabed mining. Our first witness is Jason Shu, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. Our second witness is Dr. Seaver Wang, who currently serves as the Director of Climate and Energy at the Breakthrough Institute. Oops. And finally, we'll hear from David Calhoun, as the Director of Barron. I'm going to ask the staff to put the longer statement in the record, so in the interest of time, I'll turn it over to the three of you for opening statements. And I should pick the order. Why don't we go to Dr. Shu first? It's probably what we agreed on, isn't it, Dr. Shu?
Chair Shriver, Vice Chair Kagan, distinguished members of the Commission, it is an honor to appear before you today on what I believe is one of the most urgent security challenges facing Taiwan and the broader Indo-Pacific region: China's deliberate campaign against undersea cable infrastructure. As a former legislator in Taiwan and now a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, my work has focused on technology, defense, and gray zone coercion. What we are witnessing under the sea is not an isolated maritime accident. It is a systematic pressure, calibrated, deniable, and escalating. Let me be clear. Subsea cable security is not a future risk. It is a present and accelerating danger. Subsea fiber optic cable carries roughly 97% of global intercontinental data traffic. Despite the image of the wireless world, nearly all the financial transactions, semiconductor coordination, military communication, and cloud infrastructure depend on the subsea cables. Taiwan connects to the world through just 24 undersea cables. These cables sustain Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing, financial markets, civilian communication, government and military command systems. A prolonged disruption would not only inconvenience 23 million people. One estimate places the economic cost at 55 million per day, before accounting for critical damage on global semiconductor supply chains. The Taiwan Strait is not just a geopolitical fault line. It is a data artery of global economy. In February 2023, two cables connecting Taiwan's Matsu Islands were cut within 6 days, first by a Chinese fishing vessel, then by a cargo ship dragging anchor. 14,000 residents endure over 50 days of degraded connectivity. Between January and February 2025 alone, Taiwan recorded 4 additional cable disruption incidents, one of which involved a Tanzania flag vessel controlled by a Hong Kong company, crewed by a Chinese national, that disabled its tracking system before dragging its anchor across the key Trans-Pacific link. The vessel, Hong Tai 58, responsible for severing a Taiwan Penghu cable, had previously operated under 2 other names across 3 maritime registries. This is not coincidence. This is a shadow maritime network designed for deniable gray zone operations. Even more concerning is the growing coordination between China and Russia. In November 2024, the Chinese vessel Yipan 3 dragged its anchor for over 100 miles in the Baltic Sea, severing 2 European cables. European investigators identified Russian crew presence and intelligence coordination between Russia and China. The lesson is clear. Subsea infrastructure attacks are becoming normalized forms of hybrid warfare. The threat must not be assessed in isolation. It is part of the increasingly integrated challenges to U.S. and allies' resilience. In PLA doctrine, cutting undersea cable is among the earliest pre-invasion actions. By targeting as few as 3 cable clusters near the Bashi Channel, China could theoretically reduce Taiwan's international bandwidth by up to 95%. Combined with cyber operations and satellite jamming, this would create a multi-domain informational denial strategy from space to the seabed. In the peacetime, average cable repair time exceeds 40 days. Taiwan has no indigenous cable repair ships. In the wartime, repairs would be nearly impossible. Satellites are necessary, but not sufficient. My recommendations. Congress can act on several fronts. Number one, pass the Taiwan Undersea Cable Resilience Initiative Act. Number two, modernize the international legal framework governing cable protection. The current convention dates back to 1884. Number three, expand enforcement tools and sanctions targeting IUU vessels and the proxy actors used in cable sabotage. On the Taiwan side, Taiwan should build indigenous cable repair capacity, ideally with Japan. Taiwan's Coast Guard should expand its vessel watch list, patrols near the critical cable corridors. Taiwan must diversify landing stations beyond current metropolitan concentration points, reducing the geographic choke points that make the entire system vulnerable to a handful of precision strikes. In conclusion, the United States has a narrowing window to strengthen deterrence before crisis dictates the response. China will continue gray zone operations as long as the costs remain low and ambiguity remain exploitable. Undersea cables are not just infrastructure. They are the barbed wire of the 21st century digital information order. They mark the threshold between stability and isolation. In a Taiwan contingency, cable disruption will not be the beginning of war, but it will be the signal that escalation has begun. Before I close, I want to speak directly as a former legislator from Taiwan. Taiwan's legislature must pass the urgent defense budget. Taiwan's national security cannot be a partisan issue. Taiwan's political parties, both ruling and opposition, must stand in unity when facing national security threats. Only by strengthening our own resilience, demonstrating resolve, and backing commitments with action can we ask the world to stand with us. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I welcome your questions.
Keep going.
Co-chairs Shriver and Kaiken, commissioners and members of the commission staff, thank you for inviting me to testify on U.S. China competition in seafloor minerals. It is important for Congress to understand the significance of U.S. leadership in the nascent seafloor minerals sector in light of its weighty implications for the development of naval weapons and platforms, for the pursuit of greater supply chain security across multiple critical minerals, and for the protection of U.S. national interests in the high seas. Exploration and recovery techniques and technologies for seafloor minerals significantly overlap with the race to develop new underwater naval systems. This dual-use potential means that efforts to pursue seafloor minerals in the long term can considerably enhance the warfighting capabilities of participating nations. Mineral exploration on the abyssal seafloor inherently involves the launch, operation, recovery, and coordination of advanced underwater and seafloor vehicles designed for high reliability at ocean depths as deep as 4 to 6 kilometers. Such efforts will likely deliver improved performance of underwater and seabed platforms designed to contest strategic waters that are often shallower, like maritime choke points, the vicinity of important naval anchorages, and regions like the Western Pacific and Arctic Oceans. Technology areas of particular interest include underwater vehicle power systems and autonomous behavior, mine warfare, and moored seabed sensors, but encompass an impressive range of domains. Simultaneously, seafloor minerals offer the United States an opportunity to improve the country's supply chain security for 4 critical minerals at once: nickel, cobalt, manganese, and copper. Polymetallic nodules are the seabed mineral resource type closest to viable commercial scale recovery and contain rich grades of these 4 minerals. One production vessel recovering 3 million dry tons of seafloor nodules annually would, in theory, be sufficient to confer full U.S. manganese supply independence, with 2 vessels delivering full cobalt supply independence. Preliminary deep-sea rare earth mud collection tests conducted by Japan in January highlight interest in seafloor mineral recovery to benefit other critical mineral supply chains. However, most companies targeting nodules do not currently intend to extract rare earths as part of their initial processing operations. In any case, several difficult obstacles stand in the way of the U.S. being able to make meaningful use of seafloor minerals. First, companies in this sector have yet to demonstrate nodule collector systems at full commercial scale for an extended period. Field trials have been limited to collecting a few thousand nodules over the span of just several days of test operation. At the same time, onshore metallurgical processing flow sheets for recovered nodules remain incompletely demonstrated. Unreliable nodule collection systems prone to outages could, in theory, compromise the economics of seafloor minerals, as could delayed development of suitable processing pathways. Second, the United States also lacks suitable processing facilities and faces challenges to developing economically viable metallurgical plants. The U.S. operates no nickel smelters, no cobalt processing, no manganese smelters, and just 2 copper smelters, with no existing facility available and suitable for conversion to handle nodules as a feedstock. The Chinese steel and non-ferrous metals sectors, by contrast, possess ample technical expertise and processing capacity, in addition to vast downstream capacity to process seafloor minerals into battery cathode active materials, specialty steels, and stainless steels. Third, regulatory and political pathways that would allow the U.S. to exploit and access seafloor minerals pose continued uncertainties. The United States is not a party to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, and last year asserted the right to unilaterally issue licenses and permits to U.S. citizens to explore and exploit polymetallic nodules in high sea waters beyond national jurisdiction. This firmly sets the U.S. apart from procedures to pursue seafloor minerals in international waters through the International Seabed Authority, or ISA, established by UNCLOS. Yet at the same time, U.S. federal seafloor mineral licensing and permitting pathways have no precedent for actual use and require substantial revision and modernization to make them fit for purpose. Meanwhile, seafloor mineral deposits within U.S. sovereign waters remain relatively less characterized and require further assessment for commercial potential. Additionally, opposition to seafloor mineral activities by many environmental and civil society groups remains prevalent and organized. Overall, collector system and processing considerations, in my view, make it difficult to imagine polymetallic nodules contributing meaningfully to U.S. mineral supply on timescales of much less than 5 years, even with a fast-paced crash program. Yet this is not particularly different from long lead times facing broader mine or smelter projects in the United States, making seafloor minerals worth contemplating as part of overall U.S. critical mineral strategy, which must necessarily plan over the next 5 to 10 years. The seafloor minerals sector may also emerge as a new dimension in which the U.S. and China compete to exert geopolitical influence and exert de facto control over ocean regions and sea lines of communication. China has already explored or secured bilateral cooperative agreements with small island nations like Kiribati and the Cook Islands to partner on seafloor minerals exploration, strengthening Beijing's diplomatic ties across the Pacific. Meanwhile, China's international seafloor mineral claims through the ISA and potential mineral recovery operations in the future establish avenues for persistent Chinese naval and civil maritime presence in high sea regions of the Central Pacific. Such considerations highlight seafloor minerals as a potentially disruptive domain with multiple vectors of strategic significance. Yet the U.S. government will need to proceed calculatingly to advance a varied set of military, critical minerals, and geopolitical interests. The U.S. should particularly prioritize mineral resource development in U.S. sovereign waters and partnerships to develop resources in the exclusive economic zones of partner countries. Such partnerships could emphasize technical cooperation, collaborative scientific surveys, coordinated regulatory development, collaborative downstream supply chain agreements, and resource area environmental protection. Meanwhile, federal policies should mobilize domestic scientific resources to accelerate federal regulatory development, intensify mineral resource mapping, study mineral processing approaches, and improve technologies and practices for minimizing environmental impacts. Congress should consult the U.S. Navy to explore ways to leverage the dual-use potential of relevant underwater vehicle and technology capabilities. Finally, Congress should pass legislation to correct key weaknesses of the Deep Seabed Hard Mineral Resources Act and to clarify the status of international seafloor minerals arriving in the U.S. and partner countries for policy program eligibility and trade purposes. I look forward to further discussion and to addressing your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Calhoun.
Chair Schreiber, Vice Chair Kuiken, distinguished commissioners and staff, thank you for the invitation to testify. I'm honored to support this important hearing. 2 years ago, I worked with my colleagues at Barron to publish Deep Sea Minerals, the next arena of U.S. China competition. In sum, seabed minerals have the potential to transform mineral supply chains, naval warfare, and the global balance of power. Today, the United States lacks mineral security while its primary adversary, China, has established itself as the world leader. If China can secure a leading position in seabed minerals, it will make America even more vulnerable to coercion. This industry will reshape the geopolitical landscape. There will be winners and losers. 3 factors will contribute to commercial extraction of seabed minerals within a decade. First, the potential gap between mineral supply and demand in the next 20 years. This is due to the growing adoption of mineral-intensive energy sources and increased electricity needs for artificial intelligence. Second, global dependence on a relatively small group of critical mineral sources. Both America and China want to reduce their import reliance and increase their mineral security. Third, the quantity and quality of seabed mineral deposits. According to one estimate, the Clarion-Clipperton Zone has more manganese, tellurium, nickel, cobalt, and yttrium than terrestrial reserves combined. Collectively, seabed minerals constitute one of the greatest untapped resource deposits on Earth. In the words of one Chinese think tank scholar, the advent of deep-sea mining is inevitable. Our report found that seabed minerals will revolutionize the importance of maritime borders. This is evident in China's efforts to secure contracts at the International Seabed Authority and win what Chinese analysts are calling a blue land rush. China's de jure exclusive economic zone is only the 33rd largest in the world, but China disagrees. The well-documented hypocrisy of its formal ratification of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, while disregarding the 2016 Permanent Court of Arbitration ruling, is factoring into its interest in seabed minerals. Beyond expanding its maritime borders, China sees ISA contracts as a long-term strategy to add to its blue territory. As a result, China's prioritization of seabed mineral technology is unparalleled. Over 1 month before President Trump signed the executive order securing America's offshore critical minerals and resources, China's government work report labeled deep-sea technology a strategic emerging industry. In the intervening weeks, Chinese provincial and municipal governments promulgated plans to develop their blue economies, advisory firms published forecasts for the sector, and companies involved in undersea technology fielded questions about their plans to enhance their undersea capabilities. Chinese SOEs are playing a large role. Beijing Pioneer, one of China's ISA contractors, reportedly is now a subsidiary of China Merchants Group. A subsidiary of China Minmetals, Changsha Research Institute of Mining and Metallurgy, CRIM, is another prominent example. CRIM is a former government research institute that secured China's first seabed mining-related patent in 1996 and has played an integral role in almost half of China's major seabed mining tests. Other major SOEs have also published reports praising the potential of the undersea technology sector. China is actively attempting to address its remaining weaknesses. An experienced Chinese deep-sea researcher claimed in 2024 that China suffers from an over-reliance on foreign imports and described the prevailing mindset as, quote, buying is better than making. Also in 2024, a prominent Chinese engineer described a 5 to 10 year technological gap between China and the West. From the outset, China's seabed mineral R&D has relied on Western partners. Between 1996 and 2000, Cybernetics, a French company with a specialization in undersea robotics, worked with CRIM to create China's second collector vehicle. A more recent example is Global Fortune 500 member CRC Group subsidiary Times Electric's 2015 acquisition of Soil Machine Dynamics. Challenges remain in localizing production, transporting minerals from the seabed to the surface, and conducting integrated operations. Despite these issues, China believes it can leapfrog its rivals. An internal Barron estimate shows China has well over 1,000 seabed mining-related patents compared to fewer than 50 for U.S. entities. Perhaps as a result of these efforts, one Chinese industry leader claimed in an August 2025 interview that China's remotely operated vehicles are already at the same level as its Western rivals. China is catching up. 3 policy recommendations. First, monitor China's progress. We are flying blind. The most recent U.S. Geological Survey country report for China is for 2023. Increasing the rate of these reports will provide vital insights for U.S. business leaders and policymakers. In addition, including a section in the annual mineral commodity summaries on seabed minerals would help decision makers stay abreast of China's progress and get back on the front foot. Second, identify abundant deposits. In the past months, U.S. research vessels have helped strengthen ties with the Cook Islands. These voyages provide a model for future U.S. efforts to bolster its network of alliances in the Pacific and will support responsible extraction operations in the future. Updated resource estimates from these voyages will also encourage the flow of U.S. capital to promising projects. Third, build American leadership. The involvement of state-backed institutions insulates Chinese entrants from the regulatory and financial risks facing U.S. entrants. The Trump administration and Congress are focusing on America's moribund mineral processing and shipbuilding industries, but more can be done to incentivize American investment. Advancing and scaling U.S. seafloor mapping, extraction, environmental monitoring, shipping, and processing will not happen overnight. The highest value investment would be a government-backed, first-of-its-kind nodule processing facility in the United States. Such a facility would help shift the center of gravity of critical mineral supply chains away from China and back toward America. We are at risk of ceding yet another strategic industry to China. In 20 years, the United States could see itself crowded out of the EEZs of allies and partners, international waters, and forced to watch China extract minerals in the EEZs of Vietnam, the Philippines, and around the world. China has a viable path to become the technological and processing hub of the seabed mineral sector, expanding its OPEC-like control of critical mineral supply chains in the process. This will erode American deterrence and help establish China as the regional hegemon. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Calhoun. We are going to go in alphabetical order, so that means that Commissioner Bodovich is first.
Mr. Hsu, you spoke about the need for regulations and laws to create a deterrence against the cutting in cables. What is a realistic deterrence that's obviously not military that would stop this from happening?
Thank you, Commissioner. I think one of the strongest deterrent would be allies working together in the region to share the early stage warning, particularly when China creates false signal when it tries to enter into the gray zone activities. One of the most prevalent Chinese gray zone warfare capabilities to shock the regional actors by creating synchronized accidents and with militia boats and dragging their anchors in different areas. And this has created confusion amongst our allies because allies such as Japan and Philippines are also facing the same ambiguity and confusion state. So it's very important to develop a coordinated response as an integration to deal with real-time threats. And also, as we look at the current situation, right now, this is a real-time map of the Taiwan's 15 existing cables. Now, if you look at this, 8 are currently broken. And we don't have information whether they are deliberately cut by China or they are broken because of the outdated infrastructure or the weather situation. But these are all created under the gray zone sphere, and because it also takes more than 50 days to repair. So it is becoming a very challenging state as we look at the already difficult situation to repair in the region.
Well, and this is part of the problem, right? Where if a fishing boat could accidentally or intentionally pull an anchor and cut a cable, trying to define a deterrence to stop that,
right,
it seems pretty difficult.
Yeah, I would advocate that one of the probably most effective way is joint patrol by the Coast Guards in Japan and Taiwan, especially concerning the water nearing both countries' territory. Especially some of those cables are broken or damaged in the areas that's overlapping the two countries' territory. And Taiwan needs to broaden its vessel patrol to those corridors, and so is Japan as well, so that when some sort of accident happens, there could be a joint response.
Thank you. Mr. Calhoun, when we talk about minerals offshore, what kind of exploration has been done, needs to be done? How far are we away from being able to scale some of these critical mineral deposits?
Yeah, for sure. The USGS has done many surveys over the past decades. There was a peak of U.S. leadership in exploration in the 1960s and 70s. In fact, when I mentioned patents for U.S. firms, most of those happened in the 20th century, so very few recently. In per Seaver's comments, and I also would like to hear his thoughts on this question too, all it matters is finding the right kind of deposit. And so it could be off the coast of Alaska, it could be off the coast of Wake Island, it could be Northern Marianas. Just there hasn't been not enough work has been done by USGS and others. Also have been enough resources devoted to it in recent years to find potential viable deposits. And that's what the administration, I think, is trying to do with BOEM right now, to invite more exploration of these American continental waters. But all it takes is find the right deposit. But per Seaver's comments, there's a lot of technological issues that need to be addressed to make these deposits commercially viable if they are the right quantities.
So, Mr. Wang, how much time would it take Is this, we could do it in a couple of years to try to identify, or is this a decades-long process?
So I think a distinction would need to be made between which resource deposits we're talking about. Based on the president's executive order, which focuses on mineral resources in international waters, particularly the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, those resources have been extensively mapped. So contractors already know where the most dense nodule fields are and have already considered how they would strategize their plan of operations to commercially recover those nodules. So that would, those resources are closer to commercial scale development. However, resources in the US's EEZ zone waters, my understanding is that current BOEM and NOAA mapping efforts have done basic mapping for half of those waters, and detailed resource characterizations have not yet been done. And that would be a necessary requirement in order for commercial operations in those regions to go forward, because you need a certain requisite density, particularly for nodules, in order for recovery to be economically viable.
And so just for my understanding, how long does that take? If you want to start a survey, is this a year or is it longer?
If you were to do an intensive crash program, it could potentially be done in a year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Hodges.
Thanks. Several of you have spoken this morning about sort of the Chinese deploying undersea capabilities, whether that's deploying cables, repair capabilities, seabed mineral extraction. Building off the question that was just asked by Commissioner Budovich, what's stopping the U.S. and allies from building an American Shenzhen to really sort of tackle this and continue to seize the day?
Thank you, Commissioner, for your question. I think one of the most challenging situations is under seabed mapping. Right now, China controls the World Seabed Mapping Authority. And it is very clear that, especially the law that I mentioned, that convention that dates back to 1884, that was mapping that's done with a telegraph wire. But today it's a fiber optic cable. So there needs to be a re-initiation of convention and to re-examine the current state of the seabed mapping. And also the incidents that I described just now around the Taiwan island, the issue that we face is those seabed mapping are now either controlled by China or China, Korea, and Japan. So when China is involved in it, it makes it other two parties also hard to react as well. And secondly is to harden the physical facilities around those areas, especially for the redundancy and also the data storage build-up as well. I mentioned that there are 4 cables are being cut, have not been repaired by the Taiwan authorities. And those are the same cables that share data by Google, Amazon, and Tesla and Apple. So those are also deliberate targeting on the U.S. Technology assets as well.
Great. And Mr. Wang?
Commissioner Hodges, may I clarify the question, what is required to build an American Shenzhen?
Yes, I guess the question I'm kind of thinking through here is, as the United States, as sort of the policymakers are looking at this question, there's a huge amount of tailwinds building off of the executive orders that have been put forward. There's obviously, per your testimony, a lot of opportunity here. What's stopping us from actually taking advantage of that opportunity?
Yeah, I think it's important not to underestimate the obstacles that are standing in the way of the U.S. actually making commercial use of seafloor minerals. So one set of obstacles I outlined is regulatory uncertainty. In addition to developing the licensing and permitting system to enable companies to potentially collect these minerals, there's a lot of uncertainty around the environmental standards that they will be held to, and those performance-based standards need to be adequately developed. I would also point out a lot of market uncertainty. There has been a lot of price volatility in nickel and cobalt markets, in particular in recent years, and that does create some potential economic headwinds regarding the precise margin of profitability of seafloor mineral collection, particularly given the operational considerations I've mentioned. And then finally, there's a key set of obstacles around capability gaps. So first off, demonstrating that collector systems can work reliably, and second off, processing is a major gap, as both David and I have emphasized.
Yeah, building on those comments, as I mentioned in my testimony, it's regulatory and financial barriers right now, and the risks facing U.S. investment are significant without any clear prospect of getting a return on that investment. And so right now, the efforts at BOEM to increase opportunities for exploration in American territorial waters is a promising step. Right now, you don't just have a Shenzhen in China, you have a Sanya, you have a Guangzhou, you have a Shandong, you have all kinds of different areas of the country that are mobilizing behind this effort. And so I just think it's really important for us to take into consideration for Admiral Studeman's comments about us being distracted. I do think we are distracted right now from how much of an effort China is putting into being able to commercialize these operations. And even though it might be 10 years, that still is like relatively short for a mining operation. So we need to be very aware of the threat.
I think I'm calling on myself now. All right. Admiral Brooks talked to us about beyond China's EEZs and their activities in the critical mineral space. And he referred to it as almost like a BRI-like activity that they were conducting in a lot of these spaces. Other than sort of shining a light on it, sort of identifying the sort of debt diplomacy cycle that the Chinese get these countries into it, how should we think about this problem from sort of a new and novel way? And the reason I ask this question is I feel like the shining a light on it strategy, has some effect, but countering it is more important. And sort of how do we think about that? Is this a unleashing private capital situation? Is this unleashing the State Department's assistance authorities? Is it both? Is it something different? Jump ball, whoever wants to take a spin at answering it.
So I have a few thoughts on that question. So I think one important thing from the seafloor minerals consideration is that BRI-like initiatives in collaboration with international partners, between China and international partners, are China's potentially fastest route to being able to access seafloor minerals. Because the International Seabed Authority has been in regulatory deadlock, and because China is still assessing the quality of their seafloor mineral resources in their relatively limited exclusive economic zone, other countries' EEZs are their most promising route to being able to collect seafloor minerals commercially in the near term. And so here, I would agree that the State Department's role is. Think that the State Department's role is very important here. To take the Cook Islands as an example, I think the government of the Cook Islands is explicitly trying to balance the United States and China in soliciting technical support, scientific surveying, and as it moves towards regulatory development and potentially eventually commercial recovery of the minerals in their EEZ. And so I think other island nations in the Central Pacific would be interested in being able to balance sort of competing value propositions from many countries that have interest in mineral resources in their EEZs.
Yeah, no, there's a lot that can be done. Engaging is the first step. The State Department has a large role to play in this, and there's been a lot of effort recently with the voyages I mentioned to the Cook Islands that have done it's been good for us. We haven't been present as much as we could have in the past few years, even though the Cook Islands has wanted to have American involvement. Generally speaking, there is a greater affinity for the Pacific Island states with the United States when we do engage. And then there's a lot of people in Washington have done a lot of great work on this topic, ways the United States can engage. I know Andrew Harding at Heritage Foundation has done a lot of work on this. I recommend it to you all. But yeah, there's a lot that can be done, and showing up is the first step, and that's what we started doing last fall, but I encourage more of that.
Mr. Calhoun, you had talked a little bit about the Chinese companies that are active in this space. I didn't hear you talk about sort of European, American, or allied countries that are active in this space. Who are the sort of the companies that are not Chinese that are, developing technology to sort of exploit these resources to make sure that, the engineering problems have been solved and the science problems have been solved so that we can start, building whatever capabilities we need.
Yeah, for sure, and Steve can add on to this as well. There's the Metals Company, of course, which has been active in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, a Canadian firm that has also been seeking an alliance with a license with NOAA recently. And then there's also in Belgium, Global Sea Mineral Resources under the DEMA group that has been very active in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone as well. And they also have, I believe, a subsidiary in the Cook Islands who's been active there. There's also 2 U.S.-backed firms in the Cook Islands. So there's 3 companies that have exploration licenses in the Cook Islands. None of those are Chinese. 2 are U.S.-backed, 1 European-backed. There's also Transocean, based in the United States, that's been involved as a key operations element for these companies, I think including one of the Cook Islands companies. And then also All Seas has been one of the main partners with the Metals Company.
Just to add on to David, I think in my view, the Metals Company and Global Sea Mineral Resources are the most advanced contractors in terms of the development of their collector vehicle technology. They've both demonstrated very heavy, large, very close to full commercial scale collector vehicles at depth in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, collecting thousands of tons of nodules in their initial tests. In addition, both of these contractors already possess production vessels that have been modified to support seabed mineral recovery. And in addition, both of these companies have conducted the resource surveying work that I was mentioning previously, and so have a very good idea of which particular deposits and areas that they would be initially targeting.
All right, that's the end of my time. We'll go to Commissioner Miller.
Thank you, Vice Chair Kuiken. I'd like to dig deeper into subsea cable traffic to understand it a little bit better. And I'm curious to whether the Chinese, for instance, have a level of sophistication sufficient enough to be able to understand which cables to cut to inflict which damage. Now, obviously, if cable A, if cable's going from point A to point B, then you can sort of glean some information, who's using it, what type of information might be on it. But is there a level of sophistication overall to understand if you're a Chinese naval vessel cutting or thinking about cutting subsea cables, would you understand, well, I got to stay away from that cable because it could have Wall Street traffic that could affect markets, but maybe we target this other one because it would have other specific information? How much do we know? How much the Chinese side know? Is this a factor? Please.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your question. We have about 500 cable sets around the world, and we only have 23 cable repair ships that are in operation. So for China, if you look at this map, that's the existing map that Taiwan's cable connecting Taiwan is now dealing with, what China is trying to find is to poke the vulnerable points where they can create small entry damage. And because the repairment is very long, normally take 45 to 60 days. So constantly cutting with a small amount of cost on them, but then would inflict a lot of cost and burden for the countries that have to dealing with the cable damage and the cable repairment. Now, concerning how sophisticated China is in terms of where to damage those cables, they are particularly targeting on 3 major cables that connecting Taiwan, Philippines, and as well as one other cable connecting Taiwan, Hong Kong, and California. And those were particularly concerning to all the internet traffic that would be connecting the Southeast Asia and East Asia to the North America. And these are the 3 cables that are also have the terminals on the Taiwan as well. And 2 major terminals are in metropolitan concentration points. So that itself also create a vulnerability as well. So I would say China tries to create all these flashpoints and to confuse as to how they develop the pattern. But the pattern is clear, it's consistent and synchronized. And to see how, if the repairment is long and slow, then the distraction can be prolonged and sustaining on their part.
All right, let's keep digging on that. I'm curious, and the fact that there's only 23 ships, as you say, may answer this question before I ask it, but I'm curious to what the global cable repair architecture looks like. Obviously, like most things, there's a U.S. side of this. It's sort of bifurcated. There's an ex-China side and a China side to the cable repair because nobody wants someone working on the wrong cable. But is there a difference between what happens in the Atlantic, the Pacific? Like, do the Europeans go fix their European cables and the Asian countries fix their Asian cables, or is this truly a global industry?
Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner, for your question again. A comprehensive system such as armored undersea cables, diversified landing stations, and a dedicated repair fleet, and as well as a satellite ground infrastructure, as well as a hardened terrestrial backup system, would likely to cost in the range of $5 to $10 billion and spread over a decade. And this figure accounts for construction costs, typically $30,000 to $50,000 per kilometer for the modern fiber optic cables. And then for the repair vessels, it's between $200 to $300 million each, and as well as the satellite system that's not been accounted for. And again, countries that are now coming to deal with these situations are overwhelmed. And because this situation happening are sporadic, but also difficult to spot and yet synchronized. So the way to really look at this is to develop a air, sea, and land comprehensive integration communication system. So it is to integrate the LEO satellite system as the backup, but the satellite system only can account for 5% of the type of the data traffic that undersea cable can transmit. But secondly is to harden those facilities and to develop a regional coordinated alliance patrol system so that when these militia boats, often they disguised in fishing boats or cargo ships, can be spotted when they are acting suspicious in the region. And then lastly, I would just say that it is in an urgent need to revamp the sanction system as well as the penalty that would punish the proxy actors. Right now, the incident that I described for the Hongtai 58, they are flagging Tanzania flag in around Taiwan, but then they are cutting those cables. And it is under the international law that the ship that flagging the country can only be the jurisdiction state that can punish the wrong actor. So it is very important to re-examine the existing legal framework to deal with this issue in a more coordinated and comprehensive manner.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. Commissioner Shriver is making me do this twice. Commissioner Price, you're up.
Thank you, and thank you all for your testimony today. I want to go to your recommendations. The most important thing we do every year, in my humble opinion, are the recommendations that we give to Congress. So I'd like to ask each of you a question in relations to your recommendations. I want to start with Mr. Calhoun. You talked about a nodule processing plant. Can you give me another minute's worth of what that entails, what the scope is, what is the cost involved, how would that work?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. And I know Seaver is more aware of the specifics of the processing that would be required, but some proposals have been for on the Gulf Coast, where we have a lot of infrastructure already built out, a lot of relatively affordable energy that would be necessary to support such a facility. It would be an expensive operation, though. There are different estimates. Around $1 billion, I think, has been put around, but there are other considerations that would factor into that. I will mention that China has already been doing extensive work on their own abilities to process polymetallic nodules. Most of the patents that have been received by firms in the past few years have all been Chinese firms for these technologies, these processes. And there was a recent operation that CRIM did as a subsidiary of Minmetals, which, again, there's a lot of overlap in capabilities within Minmetals that would be well suited to build out a very effective Chinese seabed mineral sector that we don't have domestically right now.
So when you talk about building it out domestically, are you talking it as a public-private kind of partnership? What's your?
It could be public-private. In my recommendations, I do think government-funded, government-backed, that's been thrown around by the Department of Energy in the past, to have a fully government-funded operation to de-risk investments for other aspects of the supply chain. Because right now we don't have a lot of this expertise domestically, and it's very cost-prohibitive for investors to go to these projects with this elephant in the room.
Thank you. Dr. Wang, you can continue on that one, and then I have another particular question.
Thank you, Commissioner Price. A few things I would add. First, under the Deep Seabed Hard Mineral Resources Act, any minerals collected in waters beyond America's national jurisdiction, like in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, are currently required to be processed in the United States. So one of my recommendations was that this piece of statute in DSHMRA might be revised slightly to merely bar minerals recovered from going to foreign entities of concern. And this would open up additional potential U.S. partnerships. Because, for example, one other promising region that has been floated for nodule processing is Eastern Canada, somewhere in the St. Lawrence tributary, where there's also a lot of abundant, affordable, and also clean energy. And Canada also has a lot of experience in nickel processing. I would also indicate another difficulty being that a nodule processing facility, first off, it would have, in order to support commercial scale recovery, it'd have to support a throughput of around 3 million dry tons of nodules per year. And that kind of facility implies such capital expenditure and operating expenditure that it would need to run at a very high output in order to be economically viable. It would have to run, essentially 95% of hours of the year. And so that makes it very sensitive to the reliability of seafloor nodule operations and also potentially to disruptions of seafloor nodule operations, either by, for example, direct action environmental activism or gray zone activities. And so one option that I would also potentially flag is actually batch processing of nodules, where a quantity of nodules could be collected, and rather than having a dedicated processing facilities, those nodules could be processed as a batch, potentially at some existing processing plant or through some alternative smaller scale arrangement, and that might create an alternative route that would convert those nodules into materials that could be used downstream, but at the same time would avoid the significant capital expense of creating a dedicated plant. But of course, the cost benefit of such options needs to be evaluated in detail.
You also make a recommendation about environmental monitoring and impact assessment, and also noted that there are a number of people who are already engaged and focused on this issue. How do you see that balance working out?
So I think environmental social license is actually very important for a long-term sustainable seafloor nodules industry. For example, some potential downstream off-takers or companies that would use these minerals have actually expressed some reluctance, even some support for seafloor minerals moratorium until scientific knowledge can advance. So I think that that additional research on environmental impacts is actually very important to create a market for seafloor minerals to proceed. And in addition, I think this work is also very important to develop viable working environmental standards that can govern the progress of this industry as it starts out, and provide a basis on which those standards can be iterated upon based on further knowledge gained during initial operations. So I think that is very important.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Price. We'll now turn to our beloved Chair, Commissioner Shriver.
Thank you, Commissioner Kuiken. Mr. Hsu, I wanted to ask you about the possibilities of rapid repair and the implications of this, because if I understand from your testimony, it's average about 50 days to repair, and that's a function of limited number of repair ships and all that. But I mean, it seems to me if you cut that in half, like that would be incredible progress, but that's still 25 days. And if you're looking at an activity that is sort of the opening salvo of something more aggressive and kinetic, 25 days is forever. If you cut that in half, 12 days, that's forever. So what are the alternatives? I mean, I think investments should be made in rapid repair capabilities, but can you talk a little bit more about resiliency in ways that provide some redundant capabilities beyond?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Shriver, for your question. At the current rate and dealing with the current state, it's impossible to repair all of the broken cables. So we need to look at what are the priorities. The priorities are those who connected global data traffic. I think those are the priority ones. And secondly, I think there needs to be a more stronger incentive from the public and private partnership to incentivize private sector to also get into this field. I mentioned that Japan has cable repair ships, and it is owned by NTT, and it's Japan's major telecom company. And there's no reason why Taiwan's Taiwan Mobile or Zhonghua Telecom or their state-owned telecommunication company can build or work with our allies to share those capacity as well. So that's number one. And secondly is to build redundancy of those data. You mentioned about 50 days. It seems to be even ridiculous in today's sort of internet age, and as well as considering everything is now on AI space as well. And so it is very important to develop and also back up our data on the secure cloud storage as well. So develop our redundancy is probably the next remedy I would recommend. And number three is to really look at what in 12 to 24 months, what a success would look like. And I would argue that right now, if China were to invade tomorrow, they could just cut off 3 cable clusters, and that would plunge the island into the complete darkness. But we need to at least have the 30% of the backup data in order to prevent the island from going dark. So to be able to do that and also to maintain critical military communication cables for the C2 and the essential government functions, we need to have at least 30 to 35% of the data traffic running. And I would say that's the minimum. And I would say in the stage one, focus on having those data availability. And then lastly, in the next 3 to 5 years, Taiwan should be able to own at least one data repair ship, because this is also concerning to South China Sea and as well as other adjacent water areas as well.
Thank you. Shifting gears to the other topic here. I don't think anybody's mentioned the role of Department of Defense in this particular space, and I have some awareness of what the Office of Strategic Capital is trying to do. Whenever you talk about commercial viability, totally understandable, but it also triggers some of us because the Chinese don't typically care. They subsidize or they make investments really that are not commercially viable for the purposes of cornering a market, and if it's only if something is commercially viable, we're going to end up right where we ended up with in other spaces like foundational semiconductors and other areas. So could you comment a little bit on what the Department of Defense might be able to do in this area in terms of developing not only technology but the strategic capital investments and using the DoD's buying power as a major customer, putting together consortiums of buyers and the like, and how that your assessment of how that's working?
Yeah, so right now I know that there have been talks about having a nodule stockpile. So in the interim period until there is a processing facility built out, whether it's Canada, United States, another allied country, having some kind of offtake for companies, knowing that they'll have someone to buy their product, incentivizing them to continue their operations. That's really important. I think beyond the offtake agreements, it's similar to the rare earth agreement last year with MP Materials, where this is an industry that's obviously very strategic, highly strategic, and the Chinese are well aware of this and are moving accordingly, that it could merit some kind of full ownership or stake taken by DoD through OSC in one of these entrants or multiple entrants to make sure that they are able to stay competitive against a bunch of SOEs who are able to continue supporting potentially non-commercially viable activities.
Yeah, I suppose I might actually inject a bit of a note of caution on an equity-like stake being taken in seafloor mineral companies at this stage. I think equity is a valuable tool in the U.S.'s toolbox for critical minerals policy, but in this case, I think these companies have not yet demonstrated their end-to-end production, and as a result, the potential volatility and exposure to the taxpayer is higher risk than in the case of, say, MP Materials that has a working mine and a plan and existing investments in place to get to a full mine-to-magnet supply chain. And I do think that the point you made, Chair Shriver, is very important, that the contrast here is asymmetric, because the Chinese companies that are pursuing these developments are, on the private sector side, state-owned corporations with very wide portfolios that have the balance sheets to support early-stage ventures that may not turn a profit for decades. So that asymmetry is important to counterbalance.
Yeah, Chair Schreier, also just to answering the other commissioner's question about the cables that are cut that are concerning U.S.'s strategic assets. There are 5 cables: East Asia Crossing, Flag North Asia Loop, Reach North Asia Loop, Asia Pacific Cable Network 2, Asia Pacific Gateway, Pacific Light Cable Network, Trans-Pacific Express. These are the sets of cables that are mostly heavily damaged and also impacting transatlantic Asia-Pacific network, as well as the Indo-Pacific Alliance's communication.
Thank you very much. We will now go to Commissioner Slevin.
Thank you. Maybe picking up a little bit from the chairman's question too, the commission has given a lot of thought to the Defense Production Act over the years and how to use its various tools for resiliency in strategic sectors. Congress is giving thought to it. DPA needs to be reauthorized, I believe, this year. And I think the administration's been pretty thoughtful and strategic in invoking DPA for the financing and grant side with MP and I think even looking at other sectors. And I think the EO, correct me please, also calls for exploring DPA for more seabed mineral mining processing. Curious, kind of a jump ball as well, but interested in your thoughts about the use of DPA here, connecting it more to seabed mining, what operationally might be required to actually take that step versus sort of exploring it and thinking of it, prospectively. Maybe, Mr. Wong, interested in your thoughts to begin and invite others to comment.
Certainly, I will echo David's point that discussions have been. Some people have discussed the viability of stockpiling nodules, which can be stockpiled. They've been stockpiled essentially on the seabed for millions of years already. So they're very stable, and DPA is a powerful authority. The point I would make, though, is I think that before demand pull and incentives come into play, it's really regulatory red tape that needs to be addressed in order for this to be a viable enterprise, because these are, first off, untested licensing and permitting pathways, and second off, because there are these sorts of bespoke obstacles within the Deep Sea Seabed Hard Mineral Resources Act in particular, which actually make it, you have to use a U.S. flagged production vessel and at least one of the transportation vessels has to be U.S. flag, which isn't something that any of the current contractors have in their operating vessel fleets. And then you have to do U.S. processing. And then there's the question of also, I think, like long-term political support for this sector, because under DESHMRA, the president and the NOAA administrator have significant authority to exercise discretion in pending license applications or to alter the terms of seafloor mineral licenses. And so these are red tape. These are areas of red tape that create significant uncertainty that I think have to be addressed before sort of we talk about incentives or demand pull.
Yeah, Mr. Callan.
Yeah, obviously it's a powerful tool. I think in addition to potentially helping with the processing facility with stockpiling, but I think also infrastructure in the Pacific, the Port of Pago Pago and American Samoa is a potential spot where transshipment could occur for polymetallic nodules procured by U.S. firms. And so I think there's a lot of ways that that tool could be utilized to also strengthen our presence in the Pacific with our U.S. territories, but also potentially with the Cook Islands, Kiribati, other countries interested in this.
Thank you. Mr. Su, any other comment? Okay. Mr. Vice Chair, I'll yield back my time.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to Commissioner Stivers.
Thank you. Mr. Shu, on cutting undersea cables, the Chinese government has argued they've never cut the cables of any country. How would you respond to that? And you talk about in your testimony this attribution challenge that Chinese entities, they say that's an accident and there's mere coincidences. How do we overcome this attribution challenge and how do we better respond to it? Or how does Taiwan respond to it, or Japan, or whoever cables are being cut? Is it just a defensive approach that we should take, either sanctioning entities, even though their attribution changes? Is that enough? Or should there be a very a proactive retaliation? What would be the most effective way to respond?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner, for your question. And again, this cable cutting behavior is very difficult to monitor, and it's also difficult to be tracked as state-backed activities. And it is arguably challenging to even pin down Chinese PLA is behind this. But on the spot, when the Taiwan's Coast Guard is dealing with this situation, and from the various sources, Chinese authorities are involved, especially when it was tracing back to the financier of the boat, as well as how the boat registries are shifted and as well especially operated by the Chinese nationals and also captains that are part of it. And Taiwan, in a recent incident, have actually prosecuted a PRC national captain that actually responsible for cutting the cable. So to many countries that are dealing with this situation, it is to keep a very vigilant stance and in monitoring the situation, because once the cables are cut, it's very hard to repair. And again, those are not major ships that are cutting those. Those are small commercial cargo ships, as well as even fishing boats that are messing around in the area. And now concerning the sanctions and as well as penalties, I think one of the important things is that the jurisdiction and the control over the vessels registered under the country's flag pertains the authority to exercise the jurisdiction right. And that needs to be changed, especially when the flag that are flying under one certain countries and can only be prosecuted by the complicit or uncooperative behavior, then that's very difficult to do. So U.S. Needs to play a role in looking at this, and especially to coordinate ways to develop a more integrated response when it comes to this multi-registries and constantly shifting operational flagging situation.
Okay, thanks for that answer. On page 6 of your testimony, you describe China's process in the South China Sea of withholding permits for cable projects of other countries that transit through the South China Sea. Can you explain this dynamic a little bit more? And is there any response from ASEAN as an entity or from individual ASEAN countries? Are they going through that process and literally asking the Chinese government for permits?
It is very clear that Chinese are now also intervening in that region, and particularly with the cable cuts around Taiwan, some of the traffic are rerouting through the Southeast Asia as well, particularly through the Philippines and Luzon Island. And those are the type of areas that China claim they also have the rights as well, and so they are performing the inspections and claiming that they also have the rights to have a say. And I mentioned to you that because the current mapping of the global cable is also administered by China, Japan, and Korea. And so China effectively has a say as to how to further investigate the issue. So that has becoming a big problem as well.
Okay, thanks for that. If I can indulge for one more minute. Dr. Wang and Mr. Calhoun, on seafloor minerals exploration, we know Chinese entities have zero regard for the environment, and we see these entities going all over the world, depleting fishing stocks as far as Latin America and off the coast of Africa. Zooming out, U.S. needs critical minerals, obviously, for the strategic competition and for our security. But zooming out, how can we avoid a race to the literal bottom that damages our environment, damages our oceans in terms of this competition with China on seafloor mining?
So I would emphasize two dynamics that work in favor of avoiding a race to the bottom. One being that inherently, because of our regulatory system, operations taking place under U.S. jurisdiction would be held to a higher standard. You would need to go through NEPA review. You would need to abide by Coast Guard regulations on ocean dumping, et cetera. And the second, I think this point is very important to emphasize, which is that one reason why domestic or allied critical mineral projects have struggled is because there is this unlevel playing field where the negative environmental and labor and human rights externalities of Chinese production have not been internalized. And so I think that it's actually very important for the U.S. in conjunction with allies and partners to raise that bar and work multilaterally to enforce consistent global high standards on minimum environmental standards, for example, or forced labor regulation that can effectively exclude the bottom of the barrel production from the global market and thereby significantly level the playing field. Because even while the US or allied production may often be higher cost in the current market is really not a free market where these externalities are being accounted for, and better regulation to price in those factors would position a better, more higher standards production much more competitively.
Thanks.
One comment I'll make is that right now China is looking to position itself within the ISA as the responsible stakeholder. And so currently they have a call for papers right now through the Journal of Applied Oceanography for environmental impacts and management strategies for the development of deep-sea polymetallic knowledgeable resources in 2026. So right now China, especially after the executive order was released by the Trump administration, sought to portray itself as a defender of environmentalism and as the positive actor in this space, when my testimony, I believe, shows that China is indeed the most active in trying to exploit these resources. So I think being able to be aware of their efforts to extract these very valuable critical minerals is in tension with their outward stance of being pro-environment in this regard. But also, China views this as an engineering problem, something that can be solved. And I think right now, the United States would benefit from taking some of that mindset when it comes to this space, because on the surface, seafloor minerals have a great potential to be one of the lowest impact sources of critical minerals in the world. Life's measured in grams per square meters versus kilograms per square meters in a lot of the key mining areas in the world, and also avoid a lot of the most significant, really damaging externalities from terrestrial mining. And so that means there's a lot of ways to manage those impacts on land. But right now in the sea, we're, I think, not being creative enough about the possibilities to do it efficiently and also sustainably.
Thanks. Thanks for your indulgence on the time.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Stivers. And with that, I'll thank our witnesses for their testimony. And I'm supposed to announce the next commission's hearing, which sadly has no Disney songs in the title. It'll be on March 19th. The hearing title is China's Expanding Interest in Latin America, Development, Leverage, Coercion, and Crime. And with that, we are adjourned.